Hello, welcome back to Marathon Man, where I'm going through Doctor Who from the very beginning, and you join me at a story which some have called the Second Doctor's Web Planet. I have distinct memories of being told, and consequently believing for ages, that this story just wasn't very good. It hung over me, and so I never really bothered with it for a really long time, because the thing is, I used to believe that kind of thing. I was still learning about Doctor Who. There were people that knew so much about it. Obviously, they knew what they were talking about, right? Because when I was younger, trust me, I know better was a prevailing attitude in some of the elder fans. And some of those elder fans were, I think, maybe emboldened by the thought that Doctor Who wasn't coming back, and so they treasured their memories of it as some kind of like custodians of the Doctor's travels. Unfortunately, it isn't just confined to Doctor Who and a very small section of the older fan base. It's a prevailing attitude with most people about almost anything when it comes to generation gaps. Even now, I'm told by people who, like for example, were young in the 60s and consequently thought that they were the first generation ever to get old, that some things are before my time. Well, before your time. Well, yeah, maybe it is before my time. It doesn't mean I'm not aware of it, or its origins, or its ramifications. Forgive me, this does feel relevant to me because it was through watching this particular story of Doctor Who for the very first time years and years ago that I had an epiphany, and it was something that I'd say almost changed my life. And that is when I first watched the Underwater Menace. I was delighted to discover something that I'd only ever previously suspected in my youthful insecurity, and that is that people that tell you they know better don't always necessarily know better, and it is always advised to check something out for yourself. This was huge to me at the time, and it's something you can translate to everything. It's not just limited to Doctor Who. But as this is a Doctor Who marathon, I will limit myself to that. I quite like the Underwater Menace, and I think that everyone who on it from a great height and told me not to bother with it were wrong. Plain wrong. Yes, the whole thing is completely insane. The lost continent of Atlantis is a perfectly fine setting for a Doctor Who story, but in the then near future, where a contemporary scientist has installed himself, it's just crazy. But the key is that everyone involved really goes for it. And for me, that just makes it zing. Malcolm Hulke said 3 years from this point that there were only two types of Doctor Who story that you could do set on Earth, prompting him to create a third one by inventing the Silurians. While there is a mad scientist here, more on him in a little bit, I happen to think that this one is another type of Doctor Who story that you can set on Earth. We've got a corner of Earth assumed not to exist and largely undiscovered by modern society, and that allows for an alien world to exist on our own world. We don't have to travel to get to it. Am I the only one who thinks that's like really clever? What's more, it feels like the story where the ghost of the Hartnell era has been exorcised. It's not an historical, it's not a spacey one, it's not even set on a familiarly contemporary Earth. It comes out in the wash as something entirely new altogether. And so this story to me feels like it's the first proper story of the Troughton era. He's firing on all cylinders pretty much from the off. Tasting the plankton is one moment that springs to mind, and the way he gets Zaroff to divulge his plans the way he does is that's some really good Doctor stuff.
Just one small question. Why do you want to blow up the world?
Is delivered to perfection, and now that certain episodes have been returned to us, it only highlights how much good work Troughton must have been doing that we were missing when we had to rely solely on reconstructions. Or still have to rely on reconstructions and animations. Even when he's not talking, he draws you in. When he's slyly looming over the shoulders of those chinwagging to see how to put the power out in episode 2, before silently reacting with an "oops, I didn't mean to" face, it's lovely to watch. And there's an instant where he highlights Zaroff's madness by knocking on his own head and saying,
No answer.
That screams like an acting choice to me rather than something scripted. Now, obviously I can't know for sure, but it is a prominent example of what we miss when we can only hear him. And even with having the animated power, the first existing Troughton episode turning up here is a really arresting thing. It makes you sit up, it's a jolt. And I don't know about you, but when I watch it, I get to this point on the marathon, and the fact that his first existing episode is actually his 12th episode overall, it sort of like makes me sit up and go, oh my god, oh wow, I bet Pera and Highlanders are so much better than I already think they are. When he's going head to head with Zaroff, who's a great character by the way, it's so nice to be able to see Troughton acting as the Doctor, to see him lock horns with possibly his strongest nemesis yet. Troughton's strongest nemesis yet. I'm not saying that Zaroff is the Doctor's strongest nemesis yet, although, I don't know, I wouldn't kick him out of the top 5. In episode 1, when he's lording it over the Doctor and listing all the things he could do to him, I think it's a really early indicator of how much fun I'm going to have with Joseph first.
I could feed you to my pet octopus, yes?
Is one of my favourite Doctor Who lines yet, and it is an indicator in that it's okay to find this story a little bit daft, because to a degree it's absolutely meant to be. Further highlighted in the infamous moment where he shoots down Thaus, nonchalantly orders the deaths of 2 guards before proclaiming, "Fish fingers for tea!" Well, I assume you all know what he actually says. I know that bit comes in for a lot of stick, but I love it. There is the school of thought that Troughton starts to rein in his performance here a little bit because of how far first is going as Zaroff, and I think that could be true, but probably isn't, because yeah, Troughton has started to rein in certain excesses, but he still indulges in more excesses than Hartnell ever did. But he also creates much quieter and more subtle moments too. Both actors had range, but as a character I think it's the second Doctor which covers more bases. He's very definitely refining his performance now, and I do believe that in this story he is very much almost fully formed. He is the Doctor. Another story, another 3 disguises for him, the first in rubber no less, and the second in the marketplace. Best of all though is his utter delight in trying on the robes. It is adorable. And little flourishes like this are great little details in his take on the character. If he'd surprised me by being promoted to a regular on the basis of his performance in the Highlanders, then Jamie definitely earns his place with the crew here. He's marvellous, getting narky as he tries to understand everything before mucking in and showing his bravery and skill haven't stayed in 17th century Scotland. He's the most refreshing new blood in a while and actually makes for a good team with Ben, and later on for a good pairing with Polly. Quite quickly he feels like a bona fide part of the TARDIS team, proving particularly handy in his fracas with Zaroff to rescue Polly. At the close of this story, where he declares that he actually really rather likes the TARDIS and its capabilities, makes me really glad, because I wanted him to. Ben is the same Ben in this story as he has been since he started the programme, and that in itself is no bad thing. I'm glad he's still around, but his lack of forward momentum, which is further highlighted by the shot in the arm that Jamie gives the show, is starting to look a little bit like Ian's lack of forward momentum when you compared him with Barbara. That said, despite being men of a similar age, Ben and Jamie don't really step on each other's toes. They're different enough, and both actors find different enough qualities to create an interesting enough dynamic between them, even when it's just the two of them. And it's really nice that they both seem to get on as well. Polly is less well served by this story, which is becoming a bit of a trend, to be honest. The prospect of her being turned into a fish at the end of episode 1 is actually rather ghoulish, but after that she kind of like regresses slightly following her quite strong showing in the previous story. And her falling for Zaroff's ruse at being ill is laughable. As laughable as it was when Dodo did the same thing with Cyril in The Celestial Toymaker. Who appears in this story too, by the way. Well, the actor does. Took me ages to pinpoint because his voice was so familiar. Very well spoken, superstitious Atlantean priest he is too. Anyway, we're talking about Polly. She hasn't been irretrievably stupid up to this point, so why is she being so moronic now? And, you know, rather hypocritically, after chiding Kirsty like she did in the previous story, she has a couple of attacks of hysterics herself here, which does her no favours. But at least she's being nice to people. So yeah, I'm actually quite fond of the Underwater Menace. Is it astoundingly brilliant? Well, no, of course not, but I can't reverently doff my cap and agree with those who told me that it was crap in my youth, because I don't think it's crap. I think it's rather good. Okay, so the editing flits about in a rather slapdash way, and it falls into a similar trap as the Web Planet when it comes to realising the ambition behind it, but even then, the fish people and their ballet are nowhere near as excruciating as I had historically been led to believe. Yeah, okay, so the close-up of the lady in the diving mask is far too lingering, and the ballet probably goes on a little bit too long, with a score that feels totally wrong. I actually quite like the music of the Underwater Menace for how different it feels, but it is totally wrong for all of the fish people swimming about. But the merits more than outweigh the drawbacks, and after 148 episodes, it is nice to have something that feels very different. So the new companion has been well and truly initiated, and the new Doctor has well and truly found his feet. So, onwards.
Kill those two men! Nothing in the world can stop me now!
Of course. Lady in the Mask. So, it has not long been announced that this story is going to be animated, which is no bad thing, for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it means that the animations aren't ceasing as we thought they did, and secondly, it means that those piss-poor reconstructions of episodes 1 and 4 that the BBC put out on the previous DVD will be superseded. With the BBC reconstructions being so lacklustre, I did what I always do, and I lent on good old trusty loose cannon, because I really like the reconstructions of episodes 1 and 4 that they've done. And the Bond fan in me always forgets that there are little clips from Thunderball that show up in there. I always sit up and go, ah! 2 Bond connections here then, given that first shows up in Diamonds Are Forever as another professor. As ever, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this quick dip, then you know how YouTube works. Please do give it a like and share it around. It really helps me and the channel out. And what do you think of the Underwater Menace? Is it much maligned, or is it utterly deserving of any derision that's thrown its way? Does Jamie fit seamlessly into the crew, or does his presence kind of push Ben out a little bit? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you back here soon for a rematch with the Cybermen. So, if you don't want to miss that, hit the subscribe button, clang the cloister bell, and I'll take you to the moon and back.